Why did Henry VIII have so many wives?
He liked to chop and change.
Hello everyone, and welcome to
Dad and Me Love History.
At the very end of this recording, after the outtakes, we've added questions based on the show. See how many you can answer.
Dad and me love a whole lot of history. We could be the greatest team that the world has ever seen. Dad and me love a whole lot of history.
And guess what we're going to be looking at this week?
I'm guessing Henry VIII.
What do you know about Henry VIII, James?
Henry VIII had 6 wives.
6 wives?
Mad a lot, mad a lot, mad a lot.
We'll find out why he got married 6 times, we'll find out about the kids he had, and we'll find out why did Henry seem to get meaner. When is a piece of wood like a king?
When it's a ruler. Why did Henry VIII get married the first time?
I'm so glad you asked, James. Kings and queens in those times did not usually marry someone because they loved them, more because they loved the power or the riches that the other person could help bring them. Often a king or queen in England would marry someone from a rich and powerful family from another country. Henry married his first wife, Catherine, a Spanish princess, basically because his father told him to. So, James, one day I'll tell you who to marry and you'll do it, right?
No.
I thought not. Hey, did you know that Catherine had already been married to Henry's brother, Arthur?
Really?
Yep, really. Henry was never expected to become King of England because he had an older brother called Arthur. When his brother died in 1502, he was not even 16 years old, but he'd already got married. And Henry was next in line to be king. So he became king when his brother died of a disease called tuberculosis. Anyway, Henry's main aim was to make sure that the Tudor family, his family, would keep on ruling England after he died. He believed only a boy could be strong enough to rule his kingdom. How wrong he was. So he wanted a son. And his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess, she was married to Henry for 18 years. Quite a long time, right? Catherine got pregnant 6 times, but only 1 child survived. A lot of babies died even before they were born or just after they were born 500 years ago, 400 years ago. Anyway, can you guess whether Catherine's child that did survive was a boy or a girl?
Girl?
Yeah, that's right. Her name was Mary, and she would one day become queen. But Henry, of course, wasn't happy, so he divorced Catherine. So they separated. She was sent away from the main royal palace to live in an old castle.
What happened when Henry VIII bopped?
He issued a royal pardon. 1536 starts off with Catherine dying. Henry being Henry, maybe he wasn't so sad about that, but we'll see some things later that make 1536 an even worse year for him. That was only 3 weeks after Catherine's 50th birthday, and people thought maybe Henry had poisoned her.
We love history, baby. We love history. Why did Henry VIII got married the second time?
Well, he still wanted a son, and he liked the look of young Anne Boleyn. Anne only stayed married to the king for 3 years, from 1533 until 1536. Anne became pregnant and gave birth to a baby. Guess which? Boy or girl?
Girl?
You're right. She had a girl. They called her Elizabeth, and Elizabeth will go on to be one of, if not the greatest monarch, king or queen that England ever had. So Henry's ideas about only a boy could be a good leader, could be a good monarch, Elizabeth proved that completely wrong. Anyway, Henry got bored of Anne and made up some lies about her getting all kissy-kissy with other men. And he used that as an excuse to take her. Well, where do you think he took her, and what do you think he did to her?
He took her... I don't know.
He took her to the Tower of London, and guess what happened to Anne Boleyn at the Tower of London?
She got her head chopped off.
Yep, she got her head chopped off. Why was the ghost of Anne Boleyn always running after the ghost of Henry VIII?
She was trying to get ahead. Why did Henry VIII marry the third time?
Well, he'd had 2 daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, one each from his first 2 wives, but he still wanted a son. So, he married Jane Seymour. She was the 3rd of Henry's 6 wives, and she had a baby. And this would end up being Henry's last child. Do you think this one was a boy or a girl?
Boy?
That's right, Edward. One day would be King Edward. Of course, he was the youngest of the 3 children, but because he was male and because they're all sexist, he jumped to the front of the queue. When Henry died years later, Edward became king, even though he was only 9 years old, and his sisters Elizabeth and Mary were grown adults. Jane, his mum, died soon after giving birth. Of course, Henry was sad, but he had his son. Years later, after Henry died, his son Edward ruled, but only for 6 years. Then Edward got sick of tuberculosis and died.
Why did Henry VIII marry the 4th time?
Trickier to say. He's got his son now, anyway, but maybe he wanted more. He certainly married someone young enough to have children. Anne of Cleves was 24 years old, half of Henry's age when they got married in 1540. Anne of Cleves was like a German duchess. A duchess is like one level below a princess. They only lasted 6 months together though. This was the shortest marriage Henry had. He married Anne of Cleves based on a painting of what she was supposed to look like. He never met her, he never saw her, but he really wanted to see what she looked like. So he sent his portrait painter called Hans Holbein to Germany to paint her and bring back the portrait so Henry could see what she looked like. Henry was obsessed by looks. The king liked what he saw in the painting, so a deal was signed between her family in Germany and Henry, promising to get married, and they set a date for the wedding in England. A few weeks later, Anne travelled to England. Anne was tall and had a large nose, and you couldn't see that in the portrait. He said she looked as ugly as a horse. Typical Henry. Henry was hardly the most handsome guy by now. He used to be slim when he was younger, about 32 inches around the waist. But Henry was 52 inches when he met Anne of Cleves. 52 inches. Think of the biggest person you've met. Don't say their name on the podcast, but think of the biggest person, and he was bigger. He was bigger than them. So Anne had more reason to complain about him than he had reasons to complain about her.
Why did Henry VIII get married the 5th time?
Well, there was another reason why Henry wanted to get rid of his 4th wife, Anne of Cleves. By the spring of 1540, he had seen a pretty young lady, a new one at court at the royal palace, a young lady called Catherine Howard. So rather than get her head chopped off, Anne of Cleves agreed to leave Henry. Anne was given Richmond Palace and royal jewels. Henry commanded that Anne was to be treated as the king's sister, meaning she was more important than any woman in the country except his next wife, Catherine Howard. Henry's 5th wife was just a teenager, 19 years old, when she married 49-year-old Henry. They got married in 1540, so he married his 5th wife in the same year that Henry had married his 4th wife, Anne of Cleves. But Henry soon heard that his new wife, Catherine, liked to play kissy-kissy with other men. Henry was furious. Catherine was arrested at Hampton Court Palace and later taken to
Tower of London.
And guess what happened to her at the Tower of London?
Got her head chopped off?
You bet, she got her head chopped off.
Why did Henry VIII get married the 6th time?
The 6th wife was called Catherine Parr. She actually loved a man called Thomas Seymour, who was the brother of Henry's 3rd wife, Jane Seymour. But when King Henry VIII asked you to marry him, you could not say no. So Catherine Parr and Henry VIII got married at Hampton Court Palace in 1543. He was 52, she was 31. After the king's death in 1547, Catherine did marry Thomas Seymour.
So why and when did Henry VIII really start acting a bit bonkers?
Well, that brings us back to 1536. It was a big year for Henry and for his wives. First, Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess, died, his first wife, in 1536. Then Henry chopped off the head of his second wife, Anne Boleyn. And also in 1536, Henry married his third wife, Jane Seymour. I would think 3 wives in a year would be enough to stress anyone out.
Mad a lot, mad a lot, mad a lot.
And so would 3 husbands, by the way. 1536 was such a bad year for Henry. Maybe it was bad enough to make him go crazy. Tell us what else happened to him at the start of that year, James.
In January 1536, he went jousting, on a horseback, using a lance, like a long spear, to knock the opponent off its horse. Henry had a bad accident which knocked him out.
Yeah, Henry had a bad accident one day which knocked him unconscious. And he already had an old wound in his leg that he got when he was younger, but it never properly healed, and getting knocked off his horse in 1536 and getting knocked unconscious so he couldn't see and didn't know what was going on, that made his wound in his leg worse as well and caused him pain that would last for the rest of his life. So all that pain probably made him feel angry. On the day of the funeral of his first wife, Catherine of Spain, in 1536, Henry was waiting for his second wife, Anne Boleyn, to give birth to a boy. This was after she already given birth to Elizabeth. But instead, Anne gave birth to a boy baby that was already dead. That's called a miscarriage. That made Henry sad and mad. Another thing that happened in 1536 that made Henry mad was when in the summer, 50,000 armed men in the north of England took up their swords to fight against Henry's army. They didn't like their king, particularly because he sent his soldiers round to steal gold and other treasures from churches in their villages. And finally, in 1536, Henry's favourite wife, Jane Seymour, died. And you know why Jane, his third wife, was his favourite wife?
Because she had a boy.
That's right. She had a son, Edward.
We love history, baby. We love history.
That's nearly it from us. We'll leave you guys with 2 quiz questions. See if you can work out the answers without looking them up on Google or asking Mum and Dad. They probably don't know anyway.
How many of Henry VI's wives had their heads chopped off? What were the names of Henry VIII's children?
Yeah, see if you can work out how many of his wives had their heads chopped off, and secondly, the names of his 3 children. There's 3 marks going, 1 for each name.
See you next time on
Dad and Me Love History!
Dad and me love a whole lot of history. We could be the greatest team that the world has ever seen. Dad and me love a whole lot of history.
What did the executioner say to the prisoner?
Time to head off.
Find us on
Facebook
and Instagram
and Twitter. Please leave us a review on iTunes, but only if you like us, and tell your friends about us.
Yes, we'll only be able to continue making podcasts if we get listeners, so we need your reviews on iTunes and everywhere else, please. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
So let me cut this bit off the... Are you doing the girl from Ipanema?
What?
Was that the tune you were doing? Da, 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 da.
Yeah.
Didn't even know you knew the Golden Pimpernel. Cool.
So here are some more questions to see how many you can answer. Which queen proved Henry wrong after he said only men could be good rulers?
Question 2. Why was the ghost of Anne Boleyn always running after the ghost of Henry VIII?
Henry was sad after which one of his wives died?
Question 4. Who was Henry married to for the shortest time?
Who was Henry married to for the longest time?
Question 6. What happened to 2 of Henry's wives at the Tower of London?
What happened to Henry in January 1536?
Question 8. Do you think being in pain all the time made Henry angry?
What's your favourite joke from this show?